They do not have, there's no further aggression in Ukraine, that there is some price that Russia has to pay for having annexed Crimea. And in the midst of all this, with the Poles, the Hungarians worried about their actual security, with the Baltic states asking for further American assurances, to have the presumptive Republican nominee say NATO is obsolete. The Baltic states, Poland, Hungary, are banking on NATO for their territorial integrity. So it's a very controversial position. On Syria, as you were again pointing out, Wolf, he's been all over the map. At points he said that let Putin take care of it, let the Arabs take care of it. Then he says we should send 30,000 troops in. And part of that is really he has become a kind of populist mirror, where he's simply reflecting what the American people feel or want to heard said from their gut. So there are times when it seems like, the terrorism is in the news, and he'll say, we got to go in and smash them, and maybe we send in 30,000 troops. When it recedes, he said, well, this is not our problem. Let somebody else deal with it. You can do that on the campaign trail, especially in this rather novel, totally unscripted form he's doing. But you can't do that as president, because each of these statements has deep consequences. It has international repercussions. You then have to follow through on your policy. How can you one day say you're in favor of 30,000 ground troops in Syria, and the next day say you're in favor of none? I mean, you'll have deployed those troops at some point if you were president.
It's a good point, and we'll see what he says about that. I suspect he's going to make some reference to that in the speech that's coming up. Mike Rogers, you were chairman of the House Intelligence Committee on terrorism. He said all sorts of things, and I'll put a few of the things he said. As Fareed just said, ground troops. At some point, he says, yes, the U.S. may have to deploy ground troops, not for a long time, but to kill ISIS and destroy ISIS. He's gone further in saying airstrikes, if necessary, if these terrorists are hiding among families, he wouldn't rule out necessarily going out and killing the families of terrorists if necessary to destroy ISIS. And as far as the waterboarding policy, what some have called torture, he says waterboarding would be fine. He would even go further. He says ISIS, they behead people, they put them in cages, they drown them. The U.S. can't be tied with one hand behind its back. You've heard him say all of that, and I suspect he may get into some of that in this speech.
Yeah, I hope so, and I think Gloria's right. He needs some consistency on his foreign policy. He suffers from drive-by briefings. Example, on the NATO issue, I'm positive someone went in and said NATO isn't paying up their fair share to keep up their percentage as they agreed. He took that, poured gas on it, and said NATO's obsolete, and I'm setting them up to get a deal, is what he said in that whole, I think that whole exchange, meaning he's going to go get that extra 2%, get them to meet their 2%.
Because only a few of the 28 allies in the NATO alliance, only a handful, meet that 2% of their GDP threshold for defense spending. And he says, why can't all of them do that?
Right. And so what he does is then ramps it up. And I think that's where Fareed is exactly right. He takes the populist position on a position that every Secretary of State for the last 20 years has taken, which is NATO, you need to meet your minimum obligation in defense needs. He took that position and that drive-by briefing, and what came out was, NATO's obsolete. And then he came out and said, I'm just setting them up for the deal. Right? Now I'll get the deal. I'll get them at their 2%. It's dangerous when you do that. It sends really terrible messages to our allies and our adversaries, candidly. And this fits and starts in Syria has to end. We have a fits and starts policy now. It's not really working all that great. We need the next commander-in-chief to have a consistent policy, whatever that is, and implement it. He needs to do that if he's going to gain any of the folks who are serious about national security to say he might be able to be okay.
Dan, I want you to listen to what he said on New Day this morning, the interview he did right here on CNN, on this notion he should be more presidential. Listen to this.
I'm not going to be changing. I'm presidential anyway. I mean, I can change to presidential, but I'm presidential anyway, I guess.
What does it mean when you say change to presidential? What do you think presidential is that you're not right now?
A lower key version of myself, and being sure not to use any language that would be offensive, but I don't do that anyway. I mean, I feel that I shouldn't be doing that. I was doing that for a period of time for emphasis, but I feel that I shouldn't be doing that. I'm not doing that. I used to, when I'd make speeches when I was non-political, I'd use some foul language, and it would make things very exciting, and people would go crazy. But when you're running for office, it's a little bit different.
some of his advisors have told him tone it down a bit, but he's been reluctant to do so, especially when he's addressing 20,000 people at a stadium someplace at a big rally.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just about using bad words that you don't want your kids to hear. It's about saying the kind of thing that he said at the very end of what was a pretty magnanimous speech yesterday, for the most part, about Hillary Clinton, saying that she